Welcome to psychodepthh. I'm Mark Glat, and here we explore simple psychological insights to improve your relationships and emotional control. Today we'll talk about how staying calm when emotions rise can completely change the outcome of any situation. Let's get into it. Staying calm instead of reacting emotionally when tension starts building is one of the most powerful skills in any relationship, especially when emotions are running high. Most arguments don't actually start because of the main issue itself. They start because of the emotional reaction that follows. A small misunderstanding, a different opinion, or even a simple tone mismatch can quickly escalate when both people react impulsively instead of thinking clearly. When emotions take control, logic usually takes a back seat. In that moment, people stop listening to understand and start listening to respond. This is where conversations turn into arguments. Words get sharper, tone becomes defensive, and both sides begin trying to protect their ego rather than solve the problem. But if you are able to pause mentally and stay calm, you immediately break this cycle before it grows. Staying calm doesn't mean ignoring your feelings or suppressing them. It means creating a small gap between what you feel and how you respond. That gap is where emotional intelligence lives. For example, when you feel triggered, instead of replying instantly, take a breath and let your mind catch up with your emotions. This simple pause can completely change the direction of the conversation. Most people underestimate how much their reaction shapes the outcome. If you react with anger, the other person is likely to mirror that anger. If you respond with calmness, it often lowers the emotional intensity of the situation. This doesn't mean the issue disappears instantly, but it prevents it from turning into something bigger than it needs to be. Another important aspect is understanding that not every situation requires an immediate response. Sometimes silence, patience, or delayed reply is more powerful than trying to defend yourself in the heat of the moment. When you stay calm, you give yourself the ability to think clearly, choose better words, and respond in a way that keeps respect intact. Over time, this habit changes the entire dynamic of communication. Instead of frequent arguments, you start having meaningful conversations. Instead of blaming each other, you begin focusing on solutions. And instead of emotional chaos, you create emotional stability in the relationship. The truth is, most conflicts are not solved by talking more. They are solved by reacting less. Calmness creates space for understanding, and understanding prevents unnecessary fights. When you master this approach, you don't just avoid arguments, you build stronger trust and deeper connection. If you want to improve your relationships further, start practicing this in small moments first. The next time you feel triggered, don't rush to respond. Pause, breathe, and choose calm over reaction. You will notice how quickly situations that used to become arguments now stay under control. Focusing on understanding her feelings instead of trying to win the point is one of the most important shifts you can make in any relationship. Most conflicts don't actually end because someone wins the argument. They end when both people feel understood and emotionally acknowledged. But in the middle of tension, many people fall into the habit of defending themselves, correcting the other person, or proving their version of the truth. This often makes the situation worse instead of solving it. When emotions are high, logic becomes less effective. In that state, the other person is not just reacting to your words, but also to how they feel in that moment. If she feels ignored, misunderstood, or dismissed, then even a technically correct argument will not resolve the conflict. Instead, It creates distance. That is why focusing on winning the point rarely brings peace. It only shifts the attention away from the real issue, which is usually emotional, not logical. Understanding feelings does not mean you agree with everything being said. It simply means you are willing to acknowledge the emotional experience behind the words. For example, instead of immediately correcting or defending yourself, you can first recognize what the other person is feeling. When someone feels heard, their emotional intensity naturally reduces. This creates space for calmer communication where solutions become possible. Many arguments escalate because both sides are trying to be right at the same time. One person explains their perspective, the other interrupts to correct it, and suddenly the conversation turns into a competition. In that moment, the original issue is no longer the focus. The focus becomes proving who is correct. But relationships are not debates. They are emotional connections. And in emotional connections, understanding is far more powerful than winning. When you shift your attention to feelings, your response also changes. Instead of reacting with defensiveness, you start responding with curiosity. You begin to ask yourself, why is she feeling this way? Or, what is the emotion behind this reaction? This mindset reduces conflict because it moves you from opposition to observation. You are no longer fighting against the person, you are trying to understand the experience. This approach also builds trust over time. When someone consistently feels that their emotions are being taken seriously, they become more open and less reactive in future situations. It creates a safe communication environment where both people feel respected, even during disagreements. That sense of safety is what prevents small misunderstandings from turning into repeated arguments. In the long run, focusing on understanding instead of winning transforms the entire dynamic of a relationship. Conversations become calmer, conflicts become shorter, and emotional distance reduces. You stop seeing disagreements as battles and start seeing them as opportunities to understand each other better. If you found this helpful, consider applying it in your daily conversations and observe the change. For more practical relationship psychology tips like this, stay connected and keep learning how small mindset shifts can completely transform your communication. Using calm communication with a soft tone and controlled words is one of the most effective ways to prevent arguments from turning into full conflicts. In heated moments, people often focus only on what is being said, but in reality, how something is said carries even more emotional weight. The same sentence can either calm a situation or escalate it, depending entirely on tone, pace, and delivery. When emotions rise, it becomes easy to speak quickly, loudly, or harshly, without realizing the impact of those words. Even if your point is valid, a sharp tone can make the other person feel attacked rather than understood. Once that feeling of being attacked is triggered, the conversation shifts from solving the issue to defending emotions, and that is where arguments begin to grow. Calm communication works because it lowers emotional intensity in the room. A soft tone signals safety rather than threat. Controlled words show that you are not trying to fight, but trying to communicate. This creates a mental shift in the other person as well, often encouraging them to slow down their own reaction. It is also important to choose words carefully during emotional moments. Avoiding blame-heavy language and instead using neutral or understanding phrases can prevent escalation. For example, instead of reacting with accusations, focusing on how to express your perspective without attacking helps maintain balance in the conversation. Another key part of calm communication is pacing. Speaking slowly gives both sides time to process what is being said. It reduces misunderstandings and helps prevent impulsive replies. Silence and pauses are also powerful tools because they allow emotions to settle before the next response. Over time, practicing calm communication builds emotional stability in relationships. It teaches both partners that conflicts do not need to become battles. Instead, they can remain respectful discussions where both sides feel heard. In the end, your tone often speaks louder than your words. When your communication stays calm and controlled, even difficult conversations become easier to handle, and arguments lose their power to escalate unnecessarily. Stopping arguments before they fully start is about learning to recognize the early emotional signals that usually lead to conflict. Most fights don't suddenly appear. They build up step by step. There are always small warning signs first, such as a change in tone, slight irritation, short replies, or rising emotional tension. The problem is that most people ignore these early signs and continue the conversation normally until it escalates. When frustration begins to show, the natural reaction is often to match the same energy. If the other person sounds annoyed, you may also become defensive or slightly aggressive without realizing it. This energy matching is what turns a small misunderstanding into a full argument. Instead of calming the situation, both sides start feeding off each other's emotional state, and the tension grows quickly. The key skill here is awareness. If you can notice the first signs of frustration, you gain control over how the situation develops. At that moment, you have a choice: respond emotionally or respond patiently. Choosing patience means slowing down your reaction, softening your tone, and avoiding words that could add fuel to the fire. It also means not rushing to defend yourself immediately, even if you feel misunderstood. Patience in these moments acts like a pressure release. It prevents emotional buildup from turning into conflict. Sometimes, even a short pause or a calmer response can completely change the direction of the conversation. The other person often mirrors your energy, so if you stay composed, it becomes easier for them to settle down as well. Another important part is not taking early frustration personally. Often, it is not about you. It may be stress, fatigue, or an unrelated emotional trigger. When you understand this, you respond with more maturity instead of reacting impulsively. In the long run, learning to stop arguments early creates healthier communication patterns. It reduces unnecessary fights, builds emotional control, and helps maintain respect even during disagreements. Building emotional intelligence in relationships is one of the most powerful skills you can develop if you want to handle conflict in a mature, respectful, and peaceful way. Emotional intelligence simply means being aware of your own emotions, understanding the emotions of the other person, and responding in a way that does not damage the connection, even during disagreement. In many relationships, conflicts don't happen because of major issues, but because emotions take over logic. When someone feels hurt, ignored, or misunderstood, their reaction becomes emotional rather than rational. If both people respond emotionally at the same time, the situation quickly turns into an argument. But when at least one person has emotional control, the entire direction of the conflict can change. Developing emotional intelligence starts with self-awareness. You need to recognize what you are feeling in the moment instead of reacting automatically. For example, if you feel anger rising, instead of expressing it immediately, you pause and observe it. This small pause creates space between emotion and action. That space is where better decisions are made. The next step is understanding the other person's emotional state. Instead of focusing only on what is being said, you try to understand why it is being said. Most reactions are driven by emotions such as stress, frustration, insecurity, or misunderstanding. When you shift your focus from winning the argument to understanding the emotion, the entire tone of the conversation changes. Respect is another key part of emotional intelligence. Even during disagreement, the way you speak matters. Using calm language, avoiding insults, and not raising your tone helps maintain dignity in the conversation. When respect is maintained, even difficult discussions become easier to resolve. Long-term connection in relationships depends heavily on how conflicts are handled. Couples who constantly fight and escalate arguments often create emotional distance. On the other hand, couples who manage disagreements calmly build trust and stability over time. Emotional intelligence is what separates the two. It is also important to understand that not every situation needs an immediate reaction. Sometimes silence, patience, or a delayed response is more powerful than speaking in the heat of the moment. Emotional intelligence teaches you when to speak and when to wait. Over time, practicing these habits changes your entire communication style. You become less reactive, more thoughtful, and more balanced. Conflicts no longer feel like battles, but like opportunities to understand each other better and strengthen the relationship. If you want to improve your relationships, start practicing emotional awareness in small daily situations. Focus on staying calm, listening more, and responding thoughtfully instead of reacting instantly. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. Every relationship is unique, and results may vary depending on individual circumstances, communication styles, and emotional factors.